a hit, a commercially viable hit in the entertainment realm is often a lot of things that you've seen before with one fundamental thing changed. What we think of as like innovation.
All right, our guest today is what you might call a titan of content creation. He's helped build something truly special at College Humor as well as Dropout. He's produced hundreds of different videos and shows, I'm sure, won dozens of awards, collaborated with massive celebrities. Pretty much everything that you could dream of, he's done in the content creation space. And more importantly, he's just a content creator through and through. So we're excited to welcome in Sam Reich. And I want to start with the origin story and just kind of gauge when the first time was that you started thinking about, hey, maybe I should create videos or I should start making stuff. Like, what do you remember the first time that you really thought I should make something and put it out there?
Wow. First, Blake, thank you so much for having me. I think the desire to create things is pretty deep in my DNA. The first comedy videos that I ever made were with my brother, Adam, when I was about 5 and he was about 8 on VHS around our house in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We would create comedy sketches that made no sense and then force our parents to watch them. I think it was my parents' generous responses, their generous laughter that has a lot to do with me deciding to do this professionally. A little later in life, I saw my dad in a Harvard talent show where he did a bit with another colleague where it's a good bit. In fact, I've stolen it and I've incorporated it into Game Changer, which is the show that I host for College Humor Dropout, which is there's a foreign politician who speaks in gibberish and then a translator who's responsible for interpreting that gibberish. And they fielded questions from the audience. And then the sort of game was that my dad would say things in gibberish that were like clearly offensive. And then you would watch as the translator tried to sort of make them palatable for the audience, even though you don't know exactly what was said. And I remember watching that and thinking like, oh, this is it. Like this is really the there's something about this that I'm really drawn to. Must have been, 7 or 8 when I saw that. Later in life, this probably gets more into the answer you're looking for. I was in New York. I was, I think, about 19. And there were, I was an out of work actor. I was auditioning for stuff. I was doing like background work on Law and Order. I was village idiot at the New York Renaissance Fair. And I was having all these conversations with my good friend Josh and my partner Elaine, who I've gone on to work with often throughout my career, about how we had no leverage. Like there was no one paying us any attention. At the time, there were only a select few folks making content on the internet. There was, we were heavily inspired by this flash animated cartoon called Homestar Runner.
Yes.
And we thought to ourselves, there's got to be like a live action version of this that someone could go try to do. And it was entirely about getting attention and getting work, trying making a living in this impossible industry. And we started making videos. And this was before YouTube, so we were putting them up on a website and people were downloading them like QuickTime files. Mm-hmm. And I remember we had no sense of how many people were watching because we had no analytics. So it was only once we put up a live show at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York and we sold it out within a couple of hours that we were like, oh, people are actually watching this stuff, So yeah. There you go. Three influential moments throughout my life.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, it's probably not the most traditional of careers that you've undertaken for sure, but it's worked out. And I want to try to reverse engineer some of the reasons why that could have worked out. Really boiling down to the quality of the content, I think, is where we can reverse engineer some of that here. But obviously in this episode, I want to dive into maybe systems. Maybe systems may be too complex for what we're really going to talk about, but ways of thinking about creating original ideas. I want to try to dig into that. And I wanted to really start by asking if you believe that there are actually any original ideas left.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by original. And I think that like this is kind of like the topic we're going to dance around a lot today. There's a terrific book by a guy named Derek Thompson that's called Hitmakers, which, gosh, I must have read something like 3 years ago. But it has to do with how a hit, a commercially viable hit in the entertainment realm is often a lot of things that you've seen before with one fundamental thing changed. What we think of as like innovation is often in large part familiar, but just a little bit different enough to be interesting. And I think in that sense, there's a huge amount of room to be original. Because if you accept that at some level, everything is derivative, which is, I think, true. We're all inspired by each other. We all feed from the same trough of ideas, like swine. Then there's plenty of room to pull things out of that trough and tinker with them and make them a little bit different and make them original. Now, is there such thing as something that is wholly original? I would venture to say two things. First, no. We are all too deeply inspired by each other for that to be true. Secondly, arguably, the more original something is, the less accessible it is. There's a weird way in which, we are obligated as creative people to do a little bit of stealing, to do a little bit of an homage to stuff that's come before us. That's part of it. It's almost like, think about it as sort of concentric circles out into originality. If you plot a circle or a dot out in the stratosphere, no one is going to know what the heck that is. It has no connection point. So the question is, how do you build a bridge? A bridge of accessibility, a bridge of familiarity, a bridge of relatability between stuff that's come before you and where you want to go. You
had mentioned there stealing stuff, which is a pretty common theme among people that have been creating content for a long time. At some point you realize, I can't just brain dump every morning and hope that great stuff's going to happen. I do have to go out and look for inspiration sometimes. Sometimes you don't, but that's a pretty common theme. I am curious what your approach on that is. Like, if you're looking to start a new series or a new show or just a standalone video, how often you find yourself, quote, not like really stealing, obviously, but going out to find something, a base that you can start with, and what are the sources you look to for those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, well, to answer the second part of that first, I think it very much depends what you're trying to make. And I think that what I've noticed that really good, filmmakers do or creative folks do is when they're going about when they're setting about a creative journey, they're not only, doing the work, meaning they're not only like creating the shot lists and they're not only like creating the color palettes and going deep with their department heads or whatever it is. That's all very specific to my industry. But they're also on a steady diet of similar stuff. And there's a couple reasons why that is. The first is that you want to make sure that what you're doing isn't purely derivative. And the way to do that is by watching stuff and making sure your stuff is differentiated from it. Case in point, back season 2, I think, of Game Changer, certainly season 3, I had a ton of people tweeting at me to check out Taskmaster, this British panel show hosted by Greg Davies and Alex Thorne. And that got scary because I thought to myself, oh, what if this thing is actually very similar to what I'm doing? And so I watched all of it. I mean, there's something like 10 seasons of it. There's far more of it than there is of Game Changer. Just so that as I continued to create Game Changer, I would be differentiating it enough so that it could really feel like its own show. Another example, a friend of mine recently went about directing like a coming of age love story movie for a streaming platform and went and watched like all the classic favorites in that genre, new stuff that had come out in the last 2 to 3 years. And again, there's a couple reasons why you're doing that. I mean, one is you want to make sure what you're doing is original. The other is, what here can I borrow? Sometimes it's not an exact science. Sometimes it's like letting that stuff seep into your subconscious. I mean, a lot of the creative process, at least in my own experience, isn't actually like sitting down and, working on something in a concrete way. A lot of my creative process is the same way that kind of like a star becomes less visible when you're looking right at it. Like it's the long walks I take. I walk like 2 to 3 miles every night. I listen to music and I just try to let my mind kind of go. And it's then that the influences, the outside influences start to seep in, and I notice connection points between things and like stuff begins to take shape. Certainly there are other moments where I'll be watching something and I'll be so struck by the power of something, like a moment, or I will be so, taken aback by, an aesthetic or a performance where I'm like, I want that as a part of my thing. I don't know how, but I want to incorporate that into my shtick somehow, And so you make a little mental note, and then as you work, it's sort of like, you find opportunities to reincorporate.
Do you have like a database where you keep ideas and things like, hey, I want to incorporate that later?
Yeah. I really ought to, it ought to feel like more of an exact science. And I do a little. So I'm like a rabid list keeper, and I use this sort of like nerdiest note-taking app around, Rome Research, to take notes. And I have like oodles and oodles of pages, some of which never see the light of day, and it's pointless that I'm keeping these lists. Yeah. And others that I call back quite regularly, whether, they're a part of like a loose inspiration doc, or they're more specifically for a project, like notes I'm keeping. At any moment, for instance, for Game Changer, I have a kind of a working document that's next season of Game Changer. And at any moment, I'll have, episode ideas in there. I'll have like deep notes related to episode ideas. I'll have like little scraps, like YouTube links where I'm like, something like this. I mean, it's like, I often think about it as, I think actually when we talk about being creative, this is a really important lesson for creative folks to learn, is that, rather than thinking about it as like I'm sitting down and I'm creating something from start to finish, you're creating something from the outside in, from an outside layer of detail, from the broadest possible layer of detail to the closest possible layer of detail. So what that means is like, think about it like a sculpture. You begin with like a hunk of clay, and then it's like you go one level deeper and you get a loose shape, and you go one level deeper than that and you have, a recognizable form. But you never want to get so granular, with the head that you don't move on to the rest of the body until it's too late. So my Game Changer doc, at any moment, my Game Changer document looks like, here's a loosely formed head. Here's a very detailed hand. Here's like the impression of an elbow. Here's a link to something that could be a belly button. It's just all over the place. And as a part of that, I'm pulling in inspiration from other sources.
It seems to be a common theme among creators that I've talked to as well. Like you're rarely just going to sit down and masterfully create this thing from start to finish. And it's perfect and ready to go. It's a slog. It's a process of compiling what you can, when you can. You'll get inspirational hit in different moments. Some creators will start by looking for formats that they want to take or borrow. You had mentioned like looking for borrowing different things. Some people look for formats. Some people look for topics. Other people like to start with the emotion they're trying to hit on. Do you have a preference? When I know that it's kind of all over the place, but what of those pillars is most important? Like, would you focus more on capturing the right emotion or the right topic?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So here in the world of comedy, we talk a lot about something called game. And game is something that it's a term from Upright Citizens Brigade training levels 2 and beyond. And what it means is if you have like an improv scene or a sketch, there's going to be like a principal game. You might also say sort of like joke at the core of that sketch. So just to, use a famous for instance that everybody can kind of recall easily. In Monty Python's Dead Parrot sketch, the game is that the person returning the parrot refuses to admit the parrot's dead. And even though it's very obviously dead, like that's the game. And they play it really aggressively in a ton of different ways. And like in one of those, one of the ways they play that game is for the shopkeeper who's like, realizes the parrot is dead and is sort of like flabbergasted that this person isn't admitting it, just lists off, sort of thesaurus similes for dead. This parrot is gone to me, could make it. It's a stiff, bereft of life, it rests in peace. If you hadn't nailed it to its perch, it would be pushing up the daisies. So all these different ways to play the same game is kind of like what makes a comedy sketch. And even when making a show, to me, there's a question of what is the game of this show? It is partially, that's a tonal question, which means, to your point, how is this going to make me feel? But for Game Changer, it was very clear. So, Game Changer is a show where the game changes every episode. The players don't know what the game is when they start playing. And so it needs to have like a mystery quality. And it needs to be, especially in its opening moments, it needs to feel like a little bit uncertain and unsettling. And that's the kind of place I'm trying to lure the players into, is sort of like they begin and it already feels a little dangerous. And then with every episode, it's like, how can I reveal the game to them in a way that's like fun or interesting? And then how can this end up feeling like very, very entertaining? And that journey feels like sort of like the game of Game Changer. So it's sort of partially tonal, it's partially structural. But as you do that, what you're essentially doing is doing what old IAC executive Michael Jackson, not the same Michael Jackson, different Michael Jackson, would call a sieve. And I think this is like a terrifically helpful analogy, which is you're going to have like a lot of good ideas, but not all of them are going to pass through the sieve of your show. So can you maximize the amount of ideas that are coming to you and then hope that enough falls through the sieve that you have a show at the end of the day? Which is why, by the way, like I think a terrific strategy for creatives is overwriting, meaning we go into any season of Game Changer, but the first creative meeting that I have with my core creative team, we have 15 to 20 ideas for a 10 episode season, because not everything is going to make it.
Yeah, no, that was going to be another question I had, is how many ideas you feel like you have to pour into the sieve to actually get out the 10. So is it 15, 20, or is that even too little?
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, just because we've been doing this for a while now, like I know that that's what it takes. I mean, I need 15 to 20 ideas that I like, which is to suggest that like, I mean, for a few seasons now, we've been going out and soliciting pitches from writers who we love and we think are sort of in simpatico with the show. And I get, I'm completely blowing up my spot because I just said 15 to 20, but I get, I went into this next season, which we're prepping right now, with 50 pitches. And that's not even including any ideas that I might bring to the table, right? So realistically, probably more like 70 become 10.
Yeah,
by the time
well, I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, the numbers will change depending on what type of, if you're like purely a writer, if you only do Twitter or like you do YouTube or whatever, the numbers can change. But I think overall, you're probably going to expect maybe 20% of your ideas, the ideas you actually like, are really get published, which is, it could be discouraging, but at the same time, there's something comforting in knowing that you at least have a storehouse of things that maybe you want to use later. I don't know. Do you feel like you use any of those ideas that get discarded later on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a very common question I get on Twitter and on Discord, which is, what are some game changer ideas that you would love to be able to do, but you haven't been able to do for some reason? And I can never answer that question. And the reason why I can never answer that question is because so many times now we've gone back and done an idea from a previous season that either had more of an opportunity to incubate, or just like we unlocked some money that allowed us to finally be able to do it, or there was some sort of puzzle in terms of how it was accomplishable that I was finally able to crack. And so these days I share nothing because I'm like, I know I'll do it later. I'll probably do it later.
Well, what is, I want to take you back through, this could be for Game Changer or for anything that you've created, really. I'd love to walk through the craziest idea that you've ever had that you actually made happen, whatever you want to give in terms of context or story there. But I think we all have a lot of out there ideas, at least for wherever we're at, and would love to know how you think about, taking a crazy idea and actually making it happen, or how many of those actually do happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. It feels important to say, especially in the world of like serieses, which is really my bread and butter now, and it wasn't always, but in programming Dropout, there is a type of idea that's exciting because it is so either counterintuitive, or it's just like no one in their right mind would greenlight this kind of thing, which is probably not in my best interest to make. There was a point in my career where I was really drawn to that sort of like Adult Swimish kind of thing, and not so much anymore, because like a good series idea actually needs to be broad enough to be sustainable. And I understand that now in a way that I didn't always understand it. So, has that been true for like the entirety of Dropout in its history? No, I mean, I think we learned some hard lessons early on to that end, which we probably wouldn't make again. We wouldn't make those same mistakes again. But earlier on in my career and with College Humor, especially in the world of sketch, we had lots of opportunity to do stuff that was like very inadvisable. I remember there's one in particular that comes to mind, which it was Pat Castle's idea. Pat is now a writer for Sam B, incredibly talented writer. And it was the premise that, first of all, important to note that it was a children's animated series in the style of G.I. Joe. And so with kind of a retro feel. And then the idea was that when Osama bin Laden's body was put in the ocean, he didn't actually die. Instead, he was resuscitated by a group of hammerhead sharks and was turned into a kind of a half man, half crab creature who had enlisted a bunch of oceanic like animals and was now like performing terrorism under the name Aqua bin Laden. And the only people who could stop Aqua bin Laden were basically SEAL Team 6, except in this case, they were actual SEALs. They were like soldier SEAL hybrids. And I remember greenlighting this, and I remember Ricky Van Veen sort of emailing me, like getting wind that I had greenlit this. He was my boss at the time, and sort of saying, "What on earth is this?" And me being like, I have a really good feeling about this one. I think it's just out there enough that people are going to really respond to it. And Ricky, God bless him, his response was, "I bet you $20 that this does not get over 1 million views." I like within a month or something like that. And within a month, he was right, and it didn't. And I remember I enlisted the help of an on-staff artist, Caldwell Tanner, another incredibly talented guy, to basically transform Abraham Lincoln on the $20 bill into Aqua bin Laden. And then I mailed that $20 bill to Ricky. And the irony is now that has well over 1 million views. It had a long tail, as it turned out.
I love it. Well, I am curious to know more about kind of the way that you think through things a little bit in terms of ideas. Specifically, for content creators, always two schools of thought with, especially when we're starting out. Should I have more ideas or should I have better ideas? Quality versus quantity. There's always this wrestle. If you were just starting out,
sure.
let's say you're starting from scratch, maybe you're starting a YouTube channel or doing a series on YouTube, but you've got no listenership yet or viewership. Would you be more inclined right now to focus on having a high quantity of output and just seeing what works and then optimizing for that? Or would you try to focus still on lower amount but higher quality?
You know, it's a compromise, and I think it's probably incorrect to say it's sort of like one versus the other, right? Like you're always going to be somewhere on that sliding scale. I think there are really good arguments for putting that slider closer toward quantity. And the reason why is there's this famous, I'm not remembering what university it was, but some famous experiment that a photography teacher ran at some university where he divided his class into the quantity and the quality group. And with the quantity group, he said, you're going to be responsible for 100 photos. This was a photography class, if I didn't mention that, over the course of this semester. And basically, if you take 100 photos, you get an A. If you take 90, you get an A minus. Like it will correlate entirely with your grade, quantity, not quality. With a quality group, he said you will be responsible for taking one photo that you will submit at the end of the semester, and you will be judged based on the merits of that photo. And by and large, the people who are responsible for the higher quantity, like they improved so much faster, and the quality of their photos were so much higher than the folks who were only responsible for one. Which is to say, like, put in your reps, right? Like, put in your Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. That is hugely important. The problem is, this is where it gets a little more nuanced. If you go and take 100 photos of a lemon that fell on the ground and call that your contribution, you're not going to learn anything. Like, you have to have a mind toward quality at all. You have to have a mind toward, what is my unique contribution going to be here? What am I drawn to? Aesthetically or otherwise? What basically, like, how can I try to get closer and closer with my work to meeting my taste? Which is the hardest thing of all. I still don't create work that I feel like meets my
Are you a perfectionist?
My own personal taste. I can be sort of dangerously a perfectionist, which is why the whole process of creating deadlines and shoot dates and being a part of a system that's bigger than myself is actually like really important to me. I think that if I were working only on my own, I would have a much smaller amount of output. Like I try to put myself in, hold myself accountable and make myself a part of things where I'm going to have to achieve output, where I have no choice. I basically back myself into a corner. Or I'll even go out there and say something publicly like the next season of Game Changer shoots in June. And I'll say that at a point where I've got nothing.
Yeah.
And it'll be like, well, fuck, here we go.
That can get deadlines can be helpful. For like Game Changers, for example, do you have any quality indicators that you look to basically that tell you, all right, yeah, this is good. We're going to run with this. Or, and also, have you ever just filmed something and then not used it?
Yeah, I've absolutely filmed stuff and not used it. Not with Game Changers, surprisingly. Not yet. There hasn't been a Game Changer episode that's like so bad that I've pulled it. And it's rare that we pull dropout stuff. It's more often that we, find a way to tinker with it until we feel like it works. But over the course of my College Humor career and in general, yeah, absolutely, there's been stuff that's hit the cutting room floor for whatever reason. Whether it's like in retrospect, we feel like this is in poor taste. In retrospect, this just didn't really come together like the way that we were hoping it would, et cetera, et cetera.
Are there any indicators that you use, like repeatable indicators of, yeah, this is high quality? Yeah.
This is high quality. This is good enough. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, no. Like, there are alarm bells that go off if I think something is poor. And then it's like, we sort of just attack the edit until we feel like it's passable, or we have to pull it. Those are the options. The vast majority of stuff falls in this sort of like gray area for me of like, I'm too close to it to know if this is really high quality or not. So I'm just going to work on it until I feel like it's acceptable and then pray that people enjoy it. Certainly I laugh while I watch stuff, and that's a good indicator, that something works. The energy is good. Especially with unscripted stuff, there's a kind of a vibe component that's very hard to account for. It's like you can't edit your way into a good vibe. Exactly, And then every once in a blue moon, we'll make something where me watching it, I get that little tingle in the back of my neck, which is like, this is really special. And that's very rare. And I'm not always right. Like sometimes people don't respond to it the same way I do. But like, the official cast recording episode of Game Changer, which was the musical episode, I got that feeling watching it, editing it. I think it was specifically when we laid in the additional music. We have a terrific editor in Sam Gear. And we had a terrific on-set accompanist in Scott Passarella. And obviously our performers were Zach Reno, Jess McKenna, Zeke Nicholson. Incredible performances. All of that was what really, it made the episode. That was the architecture of the episode. But it's when our composer, TJ Dumpster, laid in an additional orchestral music under the bottom that I watched it and I got a little emotional watching it. I was like, oh, it feels really special. And turned out that the audience agreed, and that's one of our most popular episodes of all time. But it's very rare. If chills were my standard for everything I made, I would never make it.
Yeah, it's one heuristic. It may not be repeatable for others, but no, I get what you're saying though, and you never know what's gonna go viral, quote unquote, or what's really gonna take off. It's usually the most relatable thing wins, and it can be really hard as any one individual to figure out what's relatable to millions of other people. But
the term viral is really, it's really thorny because like these days, commercial, someone will approach a content creator, call it like a advertiser, or a sponsor, and they'll say like, we want to make a viral video. And that's the equivalent of like approaching an author and saying like, we want you to write a best-selling book, or going to someone saying, we want to make an Academy Award-winning movie. It doesn't just happen. You can hope and pray, and you can try to manipulate that outcome as best you can. But really all you can do is create stuff that meets your own standards and you hope really effectively communicates with people. And then every once in a while, something is going to pop off and you're not really going to know why.
Definitely. No, I 100% agree. And I have been approached with that proposition before. Like, hey, can you make a viral tweet? I'm like, no, I don't know. Even though I've done it before, I can't tell you exactly what happened there. Like, high quality content, sometimes it pops. Sometimes there's lots of really great stuff that doesn't. And it's hard to explain why. And a lot of that's out of your control.
Yeah. All you can do is maximize your odds. That's all you can do. And anybody who says like, oh, I've got a formula, you should trust them just as much as you trust like a gambler who says that they have a formula. It's like, no one wins at roulette every time.
Well, then there will be people that will argue and say, oh, but look at what Sam's built with College Humor. And it's a massive thing, a massive channel. Like there's so many views. Clearly there's some kind of secret that they figure like, so what's this,
The secret is I've made literally thousands of videos. Thousands. Like you're going to learn things at that point. And still you're not going to hit it out of the park.
For sure.
Every time.
For sure. Well, this gets into the idea of trends and things like that. We're talking about original content, differentiating content as well. Trends seem to be kind of in direct contrast with that a lot of time, especially now TikTok. The trends, you kind of just do the same thing as everybody else. Maybe you add a tiny little bit of twist, but not too much, honestly. But let's say for you, I ask you, we identify this existing trend. We want to make a video based on this. How would you just think through, okay, well, we've got the trend, we got this backbone, but how would you think about adding on top of that and tweaking it to make it your own?
Well, that's very tricky because these days when we're talking about trends, if we're talking about like an internet trend, we're often talking about a meme. And if we're talking about a meme, you're already late. Like if you notice the trend, it's like knowing it's like trying to play the stock market. It's like by the time everyone has bought into a stock, the chances of you being able to hit with that are, they're not necessarily high. You needed to do it yesterday. TikTok is a great place to try to take advantage of those trends because TikTok is so, TikTok content's so transitory. It's so ephemeral. With these days with content, the trends that I'm a little bit more interested in, they're more societal. They're deeper trends. They're trends that are a little bit more ingrained socially. And they're not going to like pop up like that and go away. Case in point, like the vast majority of content on Dropout these days, 100% of the new content that we produce is unscripted. And there's a reason why that is. Budgetarily, like scripted content is hard for us to afford to do right now. But I do think that there is a sort of a sweet spot for us where if you look at, the kind of content that's out there in entertainment in general, and the reason why a lot of people turn to the internet, I say the internet, it's such a ubiquitous term, but, turn to platforms like ours as opposed to Netflix and Amazon is that they want authenticity. They want stuff that feels a little realer and more visceral that they can connect to. And I think that that's like a really interesting trend in entertainment in general. And I think that I'll just use a piggyback on this point with another one. Like this past season of Game Changer had more than a few moments in it that were really wholesome. We had an entire episode actually that wasn't at all funny. It was like one long wholesome moment where we celebrate a fellow cast member. And I sort of feel like right now at this particular moment, coming out of a 2-year pandemic and craving connection with each other, like we really we have a limited appetite for stuff that's dark and brooding and cynical. As much as I love Succession,
it's great. Severance is always great too, and lots of good.
Severance. Oh my God, Severance is terrific. But again, like I think there are outlets for that stuff. There'll always be an outlet for everything. But I do think like we're looking for comfort content a little bit more so than ever. So those are sort of like newer trends, sort of like a little bit like longer lasting, below sort of a layer deep below the surface type of trends that I'm interested in now. I'm interested in the trend of TTRPG content. Our most popular show is TTRPG show. Critical Role started 7 years ago, and yet there's more of an appetite for actual play content than ever before, it would seem. It's like, where's that going? What do we, now how do we like innovate in the category that's becoming more and more sort of diluted with new content, with new shows popping up every day? It is a lot of content creators' responsibility to be very responsive. And I'm like totally out of that game now. I'm like not interested in it. I think it's exhausting. And I think the rewards are, you're basically creating content that's like not as evergreen. And there's drawbacks there.
Yeah, 100%. I want you to put your mentor hat on for a second. Want to try to pick your brain a little bit for the young folks here, or the people that may not necessarily young folks, just aspiring creators that are like, okay, I want to start my channel. Yeah, I want to blow up on TikTok. I'm starting from zero. If you were starting it all just yourself right now, let's use YouTube as an example. What advice would you give to somebody in that spot where it's literally from scratch, no experience? Maybe they've got an idea for the channel, but they haven't created a video yet. What kind of knowledge would you be giving to them that you think would be most impactful in the first few months of them starting?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is don't start on YouTube. If I'm allowed to continue with my answer, if I can begin by breaking that rule. So there's a piece of this that I think is sort of a philosophical answer, and a piece of it that's not as philosophical, that's way more practical. The philosophical piece is, you want to find a way to practice and get feedback in shorter rather than longer sprints. What that's going to do is it's going to increase your output, because rather than creating a 20-minute video over the course of a week or a month, you're going to create many shorter videos over the course of a week. And that's going to be better for you as far as feedback and improvement is concerned. The positive feedback loop is you create something, you look at it, you go, does this meet my tastes, etc. An audience looks at it and gives you feedback like, is anyone watching this? If they are, what do they have to say about it? And all that information gets pumped back into your next thing. So if that cycle is a month, you're learning way less than if that cycle is every few days. Question is like, how do you shorten the cycle? So if you're going to write a book, if you're an author starting from scratch and you're like, my goal is to write a book, and that cycle is years, like 2 years of writing your book before anyone sees it, you're in real trouble. If you begin with tweets, and then from tweets to a blog, and then from a blog to a book. Now, mind you, your book can just be your stitched together blog posts. I mean, this is essentially what James Clear did with Atomic Habits, which is a fucking phenomenal book. I mean, it's phenomenal. Like that's going to serve you far, far better. So take that, put it aside for a moment. TikTok is the best platform for discovery right now, hands down. I mean, there are people getting, hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok who have yet to break through or yet to get above 10,000 followers on YouTube. YouTube has become a bad platform for discovery. I pray that won't always be the case. But I think as they've drilled down into the habits of viewers and as they try to sort of, make YouTube a little bit more about who you follow and serving you up videos from the creators you already follow, they really fall short as far as discovery is concerned, which means it's harder than ever to get noticed. TikTok, on the other hand, defaults to the For You page, which is essentially a bunch of strangers that the algorithm has decided that you might enjoy. Terrific platform for discovery. Now, I think as all these platforms race to become TikTok, or speaking of stealing, take inspiration from TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts are both better at discovery. So what I would say to that content creator is focus on vertical videos that are under a minute and then distribute them on all of these platforms. And that's going to be your best bet as far as improving the quality of your content is concerned, and as far as winning over an audience is concerned. By the time you get an audience, you can point them to a YouTube channel. If you want to end up on YouTube, you can start creating longer form content there. There will be an audience for that because you already have an audience on these other platforms.
Love it. That's solid advice. We'll have to clip that one, put it everywhere, because that's exactly what I do as well. Start with the micro content, get the quick feedback loop going. Take away the ego too. That's another part of this. Like, you're going to get some that flop, and you have to be okay with looking at zeros there, but it's a good thing. You learn stuff there.
Absolutely. And you stick with it and you hedge these platforms against each other. Like, we've posted stuff that's got millions of views on YouTube Shorts that's crashed and burned on TikTok. It's just, you're hedging, you're playing more than one roulette table at that point, or more than one hand of blackjack. And it's not going to happen right away is the other thing. You're going to put real work into this before anyone watches 100%. Your videos at all.
If it just worked that easily, then everybody would have 100,000 followers and everybody would figure it out. So
exactly.
It'll take work. Well, you've been so generous with your time. My final question is, as always, an open-ended one, which is, what are your final thoughts of this episode? What's kind of sticking around in your brain right now from what we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just going back to, originality. You had commented on how following TikTok trends seems to be often people doing the same things, the exact same things. It's often the case that you'll see like a TikTok with 1 million views that's just someone lip syncing someone else's TikTok, which has 100,000 views. And while I think that's an interesting ecosystem, I think that we are obligated to be original as content creators. I think that if you aren't someone who wants to move the medium forward in some way, meaning coming into this wanting to make a unique contribution, you got to wonder whether you're in this for the right reasons. Like, we have a unique opportunity on the internet, all of us feeding off of each other to be something greater than the sum of our parts. But if we're merely copying each other, we become just some sort of BS echo chamber. The question that you ought to be asking yourself is in the spirit of healthy creative competition. I'm even hesitant to use the word competition, but it's how do I one up everybody? And then hopefully someone's going to come along and they're going to one up you. And then you're going to want to one up them. And that's how we keep this creative conversation moving. And that's how we keep online content exciting. This is a unique opportunity we have online, insofar as there aren't gatekeepers, right? There's no executives who are telling us that we can't do something. So what do you want to do? Make it exciting.
I love the mentality, and something I had to learn over the years. I used to care a lot about the follower side. I want the engagement. I want that. I want to make money, which obviously those things are cool. It's not like that goes away, but When you
Yes.
start falling in
Yeah.
love with the creative process and the work, that's when the outcome really becomes a
Yeah.
lot more meaningful and usually gets better too, in my experience.
Absolutely. And followership and money are going to come with originality. You know, no one wants to follow another channel doing the same thing. You know, it's like, it's a virtuous cycle. The figuring out what your thing is, you know, what your unique contribution is, and then doing that aggressively. That's the way, you know, that's the way to make a living at this.
You've given us a lot of firepower here as creators, so I'm excited to put this one out. The platform's yours to end here, to just chat about anything you're working on, anything that you want to chat about that you're excited about or proud of, and then we'll go ahead and end the episode.
Subscribe to dropout.tv. Listen, the subscription model is where it's at. That would be my advice for any content creator eventually, is to go the subscription route, whether Patreon or something else. But for our sake, go check out the stuff on our social channels. Check out Game Changer Dimension 20. I'm actually in our other programming. And then if you like what you see, give Dropout a try. There's a free trial. And it's only $6 a month, and I promise you won't be disappointed.
Love it. Sam Reich, again, thanks so much for coming on, being so generous with your time. And we'll have to have you back on one day to follow up and keep this going.
Absolutely, Blake. A lot of fun. I appreciate it.